Hello, neighbor. I'm Robert Burns, and welcome once again to another edition of Sound Off Louisiana. And I am very excited about this upcoming feature because I've been wanting to come out here and do this one. And it's gonna be a multi-part series, and I'll get to its content in just a moment. But I like to do these type videos outdoors, and as anyone would know, when you're talking 25, 30, well, a little more than 25, but 35, 45 degrees, it just was not conducive to coming out and doing a video in those type conditions. Today has been the first day that's been very accommodating. We're in the mid-60s today, but unfortunately that has brought out my good friends, the duck and the geese, who have just been fed, but I will tell you that their minds are on other things, as is understandable as we get some springtime. So if you hear them carry on a little bit, they're all full, but as I said, they have their minds on some other things, and I'll leave it to your imagination about what those things may be. We go through this every year about this time, and one young duck, who happens to be my favorite, I call her my girlfriend, she's had 3 sets of ducklings, and obviously she's the favorite, and I'm sure that as I look around and see the ducks strutting out their necks, I know what is on their minds, and I'm sure you do too. So let me just say this. We are going to be doing, and I hope the wind doesn't get too bad. It's another element that I'm fighting, but I will try to talk loud when I can feel wind in the background, because I know the microphone picks it up. But at any rate, as our title indicated, we will be doing a multi-part series on a gentleman named Murphy Painter. Now, I'm going to give everyone a little background, and that'll be it for today. Murphy Painter will be joining me. Hear what I'm saying? He will be joining me for future segments of this series, but because it has been so long since I last reported on Murphy Painter, you're welcome to just put in the search bar Murphy Painter. You can watch several features, but what I'm going to do is just briefly bring everybody up to speed. So if you don't want to go look at those, you don't have to. Let me just say this. Murphy Painter was appointed commissioner of the Alcohol and Tobacco Control Commission under the Foster administration. That's Mike Foster. We're talking about the governor of Louisiana from 1995 until 2003. And he served successfully under the Foster administration, served during the entirety of the Blanco administration, although that was only 4 years, but he served through the entirety of her administration. And he had begun serving under the General administration, and then there was a problem that came along. And specifically, that problem entailed Budweiser Beer wanting to provide a $300,000 payment to the state of Louisiana in exchange for exclusivity that would be the only alcohol served at New Orleans Saints games. Now, the problem is that is illegal in the state of Louisiana. You cannot grant exclusivity like that, and so Painter was declining to approve the license. And that did not set well with the Jindal administration and with Jindal in particular, because let's just say he had the financial backing of some folk that wanted to make sure that the Champion Square, which was the name of the affiliate around the Superdome, flourished. And Jindal was going to cram this down, legal or not. And that was so much so to an extent that Mr. Painter said, okay, look, I got no problem issuing the license, but he told Stephen Wagaspack, who was then Jindal's Division of Administration, he now heads LABI, Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, he said, you just send me a letter indicating that you are directing me to issue the license, and I will certainly issue it. To which Stephen Wagaspack said, quote, that would not be an efficient use of my time, unquote. Stephen Wagaspack is an attorney, and he's probably a pretty good one, and you can probably figure that's the reason that he gave the response that he did. So at any rate, Painter held firm. He wasn't going to issue the license, and so the Jindal administration called him, or Bobby Jindal specifically, called him in one evening, and they terminated him. Not a very uncommon occurrence in the Jindal administration. That's why I refer to it as one of the most corrupt governors that's occupied this state, and I don't back off of that. And so they needed to come up with a good reason for having terminated him, and they also were not pleased with the fact that he had filed a civil lawsuit for defamation, specifically against the Louisiana Inspector General, Stephen Street. And any of you who have been on this blog for any length of time, I'm not going to go into it. I'll touch it briefly. My lack of respect for Stephen Street, my belief that he is a complete and controlled puppet of the governor. He had no business being appointed Inspector General. You know, I've now put out there the tax liens, the occupational licensing liens, but as is so often the case with Bobby Jindal, that's exactly who he would want, one that he would be able to control. And despite Stephen Street's repeated statements that he's independent of the governor, which he cannot read the statute that employs him, the governor can remove him at any time. All he needs is the approval of the House and Senate, and that is not very difficult to get a majority vote in both those houses when you are the governor. The governor wields enormous power in the state of Louisiana, and if he or she wants Stephen Street gone, trust me, Street would be gone. And I believe one of the biggest reasons we have as much corruption as we do in this state lies at the feet of a one Stephen Street. But at any rate, he sued the Office of Inspector General's office for defamation, and about a year and a half later, he is facing a criminal trial. Murphy Painter was facing a criminal trial. This was toward the end of 2013. Now there are some ducks, so if you hear some noise, they're in the background, they're carrying on. One of them's chasing another one. I hope they don't make too much noise. But at any rate, there was a criminal trial. I attended that trial because I had, read all the press leading up to it, and I mean, they really depicted Murphy Painter to be an absolute, he may as well have been Satan reincarnated. And a friend of mine said, I love to spend time in courtrooms. I prefer civil matters. This one was a criminal matter, and it was tried in federal court. But I did attend it. I had a friend who asked me if I was going to attend, and I said, yeah, I'm going to go sit in for about 2 or 3 hours, and I think, based on everything that's been put in the press, it's probably going to be that obvious, and there won't be any need to stick around. And that's the attitude I had. I didn't know Murphy Painter from Boo Turkey. So I waited until after I knew it took 3, 4 hours, 5 hours or so for jury selection to be complete, and then read the instructions and all of that. So I didn't go in there for all of that. So when I did show up, the jury is seated, and they're ready. The prosecution is ready to call its first witness, and so I thought, okay, here we go. And I'm only going to cover just a couple of witnesses. I'm going to give a link. It was just notations that I made during the trial. At that time, I had no blog, but I can tell you there were an awful lot of folk who could not wait till I get home so that I could post to Facebook what all happened in the trial that day, because I'm here to tell you the mainstream media showed up for the very introduction of Painter's trial, and then they were nowhere to be seen thereafter, probably because they could read that this is a complete farce, which is exactly what it was. But let me start with just the first witnesses. I'm only going to cover about 2 or 3 of them, but I'm going to provide you the link that you can certainly see other witnesses to see. I mean, I was a fraud examiner for the federal government, and I cannot imagine having actually submitted criminal referrals on the kind of things that I'm about to relate to you. But I kid you not, the federal government spent about $1.07 million prosecuting this, and then we had to cover Painter's defense costs, which were about $600,000, give or take, and we had to stroke a check to cover all of that. So here's what Murphy Painter, here's what the counts, and there were 29 counts if I remember right. They started at 65. They had to whittle it down to the best 29 counts that they could hold. And now there comes some wind, so I'm going to speak up. What it involved was Murphy Painter allegedly improperly using state police's database to go through the qualifications for issuing a liquor permit. It was state police's position that their database was not to be used for that, and they had policies and procedures that prohibited that in their letter agreement with ATC, Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. I can only tell you, and I'm going to say a few things about Mike Fowler, that was Painter's primary defense attorney. He also had Al Robert. who is handling the civil case against the Office of Inspector General. But Mike Fowler with State Police up on the stand, and when I say State Police, it was the young lady heading up the Information Technology Division, and she talked down to everyone in the courtroom, including the judge, and I'm sure Fowler ate it up. But Fowler was making the point that Painter typically only accessed this database to go to the first level, which was to get an address or an email address, something of that nature. And she was very emphatic and said, what I want everyone in this room to understand is that it is not permissible. That is not a permissible use. It doesn't matter that he didn't go into the second level. And I will point out the ultimate irony of Miss Condescending, because that's what she was. You know, this database is supposed to be so precious that nobody should touch him properly, and yet we have a current trooper, Robert Burns, no relation. Let me make that clear, no relation to me as Robert Burns, but he numerous times accessed that database to cause problems for his ex-wife, let me put it that way. She is now suing State Police over him using that. It made the airwaves, Channel 2, Chris Nakamoto covered it. Burns had the nerve to sue Channel 2. And in fact, in Livingston Parish, briefly got a $2 million judgment that was executed in chambers. But that's just an example of the corruption of Livingston Parish. I mean, imagine that, signing a default judgment for $2 million in chambers, okay? But Channel 2 easily got that wiped out. But I will point out that Robert Burns, again, no relation to me, a couple of weeks, well, 3 weeks, or whatever, a month or so ago, he was on prominent display at the LSP Oversight Committee. He's one of their fair-haired boys, if you will. Says a lot about State Police. But anyway, I want to get to just a few of the witnesses. They called in a lady from Spring, Texas first. And I said, okay, because, you know, I talked with a couple of attorneys and they said, majority of attorneys like the approach of you put your best witness up first to create a lasting impact with the jury. There are some other schools of thought that you gradually build things up and hit a crescendo. But I thought, okay, if the approach is we're going to put the best witness up first, this ought to be good. So here comes a lady from Spring, Texas, and she takes the witness stand, and they ask her, you know, do you know Murphy Painter? Well, yes, from, 25 years ago, we worked together and whatnot. And so they said, did you receive this email? And she looked at it and she said, I did. And she said, would they ask her to read it into the record for the court? And it said, hi, I was just thinking about you. How are the kids? With a question mark. Now, I'm not kidding you. That's what the email said. And so they asked her, well, what did you think about getting correspondence like this out of the blue from someone you hadn't heard from in 25 years or so, or whatever the case? And she said, well, not much. She said, it was nice to hear from an old friend. We exchanged a few emails, and that was that. And they said, well, were you aware that he utilized this database to get your email address? And she said, no, but I mean, you could tell it's like, why am I here? And I had the same question, and I think everybody in the courtroom, in particular the jurors, had to be wondering the same thing. Why was she there? So, and I can't see this out. There's such bright sunshine that I don't know, maybe this sign's not fully on. I can't tell because I can't see because of all the sun. But at any rate, so she's excused. So, okay, we done brought her in from Spring, Texas, put her in, and now we got to pay to get her back. So, okay, maybe they started off soft, and are subscribing to the other attorneys' philosophy that we build it up. I'm here to tell you they didn't build anything up, and you'll know that if you choose to read the link I'm going to give you. It only takes about 5 minutes to read the various witnesses that they called. But, I mean, it was an absolute joke. I'll give you just a couple more. They called in Tommy Hodson. Those of you who are from around this area, if I mention the name Tommy Hodson, I would hope you would know who that is. He was the LSU quarterback in the mid-'80s. And I'm telling you, these assistant attorney generals that were under, I can't remember the interim U.S. attorney at that time. Last name, shucks. Can't believe it. Just drawing a blank, but at any rate, they get Tommy Hotson on the stand, and I'm not kidding you, it was like a program robot the way they pose those questions. Mr. Hotson, were you aware that Mr. Painter used the database to obtain your address? I mean, it was very that programmed and robotic. So then it comes times for Mr. Fowler, and I'm going to have a few words to say about Mr. Fowler, because I'm telling you that he's not a young man, and that's probably the only opportunity I'm ever going to have to witness him. And let me tell you something, I stayed for the entire trial, and it was you talk about one more whale of an attorney. Mike Fowler is an unbelievable attorney. But at any rate, he's cross-examining Tommy Hotson, and he said, well, Mr. Hotson, he said, you have quite the reputation. You were the quarterback of LSU, correct? And of course, Hotson, now his ego's being stroked, unlike the programmed robots. And he said, well, yes, I did quarterback at LSU. And he said, oh, don't be so modest. He said, you went on to quarterback in the NFL, did you not? And he said, yes. He said, I did have a tour in the NFL. And he said, oh, again, don't be so modest. You were the predecessor to Tom Brady. By the way, everybody sees Brady made his announcement that he's retiring, I believe just yesterday or the day before. So we're talking about a very long and highly successful career. But at any rate, he said, yes, I was the quarterback for the New England Patriots just prior to Tom Brady. And so Fowler said, you make the same salary? And I mean, Hotson busted out laughing, and he said, I wish, So Fowler's now successfully gained that report. And he said, well, let me ask you something, Mr. Hotson. He said, you have quite a few friends that you are business associates with in the restaurant and alcohol business. Am I correct? He said, yes, I have 3 friends. And Fowler asked, would you mind naming them? And it was Mike Anderson, Ruffin Rodrigue, and I'm sorry, it's been too many years. I cannot recall the third one. So Fowler just says, so since you have these associations, it certainly would not really seem that out of line for Mr. Painter to have run a check on you just in an abundance of caution to make certain that he was proper in having these alcohol permits out there for these other gentlemen. And Tommy Hotson, Mr. Hotson, just said, yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so there goes another witness. I will tell you that Jill Kraft was brought in as a witness, and if she watches this video, she may not appreciate what I'm about to say, but it is what it is. We were talking about, absolutely frigid temperatures the day she came in as a witness. I'm talking about in the upper 20s. And she came in with a very nice coat, but below that coat, she had on the shortest shorts, and I do mean the shortest shorts, and she had some boots, and she got up on the witness stand, and she's one of the ones that Painter had ran the search on. And so she says she was traumatized by this, that it was incredible trauma that she endured from this. And so Mr. Fowler said, well, you host an annual Halloween party, don't you, Miss Kraft? And she said, yes, I do host a Halloween party every year. And he said, okay. He said, and right after Mr. Painter was terminated, you hosted a Halloween party on that occasion, did you not? Yes, I did. And he said, and did you dress up as a painter? And her husband, Jim Shannon, who used to be with Channel 9, he said, did your husband not dress up as a painter? And so did Miss Kraft. And said, and she had to admit that, yes, both of them dressed up as painters. And he asked her if her husband had a elongated display that said, now he's a painter, and he had an elongated display that said, hi, my name's Murphy. She had to admit that it did. And so he said, so the reality is both you and your husband were literally gloating over the fact that my client had been terminated. Oh, no, that's not it. I was just dealing with trauma the best way that I know how to deal with it, which is humor. Okay. All right, so that's it for Miss Kraft. Now, those are the only witnesses I'm going to give you. You're welcome to go read the rest. But I do want to say this. I said that Mike Fowler was one more whale of an attorney. And I'm going to give you an example of what I meant by that, because I will never forget this. ever, unless I lose my memory late in life, because there's certain things that happen in a courtroom and you don't forget them. Mr. Fowler, on one day of the trial, had witnesses up on the stand, and he over and over and over and over again said, all right, I want to set up a hypothetical. And he would set up a hypothetical, and the witness would respond to how they would handle. I'm looking over at two ducks. I said their minds are on other things. So he sets up these hypothetical, and the witness would respond to it. And he did that at least, I don't know, 10, maybe even 12 times. And the U.S. attorney, the assistant U.S. attorney, has a witness up on the stand the next day. And so she says, okay, I want to set up a hypothetical. No sooner did she get the word hypothetical out of her mouth, but what Painter stood up and said, objection! And of course she looks over at him like, objection to what? And the judge asked the same thing. Okay, the nature of your objection? Your Honor, she's setting up a hypothetical. And she said, Your Honor, Mr. Fowler set up hypothetical after hypothetical after hypothetical yesterday. Here's what I'll never forget. Judge James Brady, who has since gone on to be with the Lord, he looked right at the assistant U.S. attorney, and he said, quote, he most certainly did, and you never objected. He has objected. Objection sustained. So when I tell you that Mike Fowler mopped the floor, I was not kidding. I mean, if it was a boxing match, they would have needed to call it off early on, and it just got worse and worse. During opening arguments, Mike Fowler said to the jury, and I quote, as jurors, as you see this case, I'm going to make one request of you, and that is that you not check your common sense out at the door when you go into deliberations. He also said, I'm going to go ahead and turn loose of the 800-pound elephant, or gorilla, I don't know which, elephant or gorilla, I'm not sure, that we all know is in the room. And I wonder, well, what could this be? And he said, the reality is you can access these databases, troopers can, or policemen can, using their mobile devices in their units. And everyone knows it's common practice for them to do so in running. When they have a daughter, they will run a check on their daughter's latest boyfriend to make sure that there's not going to be problems. So don't let the prosecution convince you that this is some kind of a sacred instrumentality. It simply isn't, okay? I do want to say one more thing. There are I talked about 29 counts. They had to call in two other witnesses, both of whom had received sympathy cards. They were lobbyists for the alcohol industry, and they were associates of Mr. Painter, and their mother passed away. And so Mr. Painter accessed the database to get their mailing address, their home mailing address, so that he could mail them sympathy cards. And he did mail them sympathy cards. They brought, well, first of all, outside of the presence of the jury, and I think Judge Brady was in disbelief that they were actually going to try to prosecute that. And so he looked at the assistant U.S. attorney and he said, and I quote, that rises to the level of a federal offense. Of course, the jury wasn't present. So they bring him in and they admit that, yes, Mr. Painter, we got sympathy cards. Now, can you imagine a juror over to the side, okay, I'm supposed to send this guy to federal prison for mailing out sympathy cards. And when I tell you this was a pathetic trial, it never, as Mike Fowler said on the one television interview that took place after the trial was over, this is a case that never should have seen the light of day. And as I said, the federal government spent over $1 million. They flew in a computer expert. Hear what I'm saying now. They flew in a computer expert from San Diego. Okay, and I felt sorry for Al Robert. Now, Mike Fowler, he likes to do the flash and dance stuff. Poor Al Robert got stuck having to deal with the minutia of this computer deal. And this was on a Friday afternoon. Everybody wants to go home. And this guy's up here for hours and hours. And Al Robert's having to put things up on the Elmo showing the different levels of the system. And I looked at one gentleman, and I will tell you, he'd already checked out basically by about 3 hours into the trial. I could tell him just staring off like, you know, get me out of here. This is a joke. But at any rate, now all the jurors are like, you know, I mean, we're talking late on a Friday afternoon, and they're hearing all of this minutia of detail about the state police database system and level 1 and level 2 and credentials for this. And I mean, oh Lord, and you know, I'm kind of a technology guy, but I mean, you know, I couldn't fault the jurors for really just, I mean, they were so close to falling asleep, it was unbelievable. And I told Mr. Robert, I certainly didn't envy him having to get up and be the one to have to deal with that. But at any rate, when the case finally went to the jury, and you'll see that in the documentation, that the link that I'm going to send you if you care to read about it, I had predicted that it would not take more than an hour and a half for them to come back with a complete acquittal. It did take about 5 hours, and they did come back and quite predictably acquit Murphy Painter, because it was an absolute joke of a trial. How our resources could have been flushed down the toilet on that garbage, given a lot of the corruption that I have seen, and it doesn't get prosecuted. I think that tells you just how much of a political vendetta this was, and it's kind of scary that, I mean, you could expect this kind of thing in a state court, but this was a federal court, and that's what's troubling about it. And so I hope this video didn't wind up running too long. The only thing I'm going to provide is the link for the witnesses. So I did all of that to tell you. Now, Murphy Painter's civil trial, and I think I've told most everybody before, Lord have mercy, there have been about 25 court hearings. You got to realize it's been dragging on for almost a decade, well over a decade, the civil trial, although it didn't really get kicked off until after the criminal trial was over. But I mean, there have been so many parties, have been motions for peremptory exception, no cause of action, and so as a consequence, there have been parties that have been added, there have been parties that have been removed. God only knows how much legal costs we've had to incur defending this. It even made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. They didn't hear a particular matter that was before them, but it's just a complete quagmire. And so much so that Janice Clark at one point, now she's no longer the judge overseeing the proceedings, but because she had to retire. This case has dragged on so long that she reached retirement age. We're talking 11 years that this thing has dragged on. But at any rate, it's a complete quagmire now. And I was saying that Janice Clark at one point, and she was, I think she was spot on this. She said this case has become so convoluted that it's impossible to know now who's in this suit, who's not in this suit, and where everything stands. So she asked Al Robert to please go back and draft basically a fresh petition, just as if it was being filed on day one. And you got to realize this is 8 or 9 years after the suit was filed. And she said, and we'll just take it from there. And so he did that. Well, that didn't do anything but start the whole process up again of, peremptory exception and no cause of action and so forth and so on. Not much has happened in the suit recently. It got reassigned from Janice Clark to Judge Don Johnson. Murphy Painter successfully got a motion for him to recuse himself, and that's about the last thing that happened in the civil matter. So I've kind of brought you up to speed, give you the little background on Murphy Painter. You don't have to go back and read anything if you don't want to in terms of past posts that I've made on Murphy Painter. You're certainly welcome to click on the link that I'm giving you for the witnesses who were at trial. It won't take you but about 5 minutes to read. But mainly, I'm here today to tell you that we are about to begin a series in which Murphy Painter will himself, not me, he's going to bring you up to speed about where things stand on that civil litigation, as well as some other things that have transpired down in Ascension Parish in 23rd Judicial District Court. So I apologize if this video was a little long. I was hoping I could keep it short, and I have talked fast to try to do that. But thank you for your patience. By the way, thank you for all the new viewership, new subscribers that we've gotten in the year 2022, and also for the incredible viewership and readership on the Billy Broussard matter over in Broussard, Louisiana, with regard to the attempts by the parish to shut down his farm. We have considerably more information on it through public records requests and things of this nature. I will just tell you very briefly that the next event will be the March 15th full council meeting for the consideration of the variance to the zoning that they asked him to present. Never mind that they have not in any way challenged the fact that he doesn't need the variance. And you're welcome to go back. I would encourage you, if you haven't seen the comments on that last feature, you're welcome to go take a look at them. They're interesting. You know, I think there's 13 comments, some of which were Mr. Broussard retorting to comments that got made by some folk that live on Duchamp Road or right in the close proximity. So thank you for your indulgence. Thank you for the dedicated viewership that we have. I can tell you we're going to have plenty more excitement with regard to Louisiana State Police, but I think common sense would dictate that you knew that already. But I just want to thank all of our many loyal subscribers. I don't care whether you've only been around to Sound Off Louisiana for 2 weeks or whether you've been here the whole 7 years that the blog, almost 7 years that the blog has been in existence. We very, very much appreciate you, and I'm looking forward, you can look forward to in coming days us having none other than Murphy Painter sitting beside me to bring you up to speed, and I promise it's going to be some interesting revelations. So this is Robert Burns thanking you once again for your dedication to Sound Off Louisiana. Enjoy the NFL games today if you are so inclined. Thank you once again.